Most people think they'd know if someone was manipulating them. They think they're perceptive enough, self-aware enough, that it could never really happen to them. I used to think that too. Then I spent 3 months going deep into 50 documented cases of real-world manipulation. Court records, survivor accounts, peer-reviewed psychology research, case studies from behavioral scientists who have spent careers studying exactly this. And what I found completely changed how I understand human behavior. Because every single one of those 50 manipulators, different backgrounds, different relationships, different specific tactics, they all used the same 5 patterns, the same tells, the same sequence, the same psychological architecture. And once you see those patterns clearly, you will never be vulnerable to them in the same way again. Before we get into the patterns, I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This is not a list of fun psychology facts. It's not a video of vague generalizations about toxic people. The 50 cases I analyzed draw from documented instances of coercive control in the psychological literature. From Jennifer Fried's research on betrayal trauma at the University of Oregon. From Robert Cialdini's foundational work on influence and persuasion. From first-person accounts provided by survivors of psychological abuse. 5 patterns, present in every single case. Pattern 1. They attack your perception of reality first, not your behavior. This is the most important thing I found across all 50 cases, and the one that most surprised me. Most people assume manipulation is about controlling what you do, your choices, your decisions. But in every case I studied, the first move was something different. It was targeting the target's ability to trust their own perception of events. You remember a conversation clearly. They say it never happened. You feel hurt by something they did. They say you're being oversensitive. You notice a pattern forming. They say you're paranoid. This is gaslighting, and the term has become so common that its clinical weight has been somewhat lost. So let me be precise about what it actually is. It is not confusion. It is not a difference of perspective. It is the deliberate undermining of your confidence in your own memory, your own emotional responses, your own assessment of reality. Because here's why it comes first. A person who doesn't trust their own perceptions cannot mount a sustained defense. They can't say with confidence, "This is wrong and I know it's wrong," because they're no longer sure what's right. They start turning to the manipulator to tell them what's real. That dependency is not a side effect of the manipulation. It is the purpose. Pattern 2. They use reward and withdrawal on a variable schedule. In every single one of the 50 cases, the relationship contained a cycle. Warmth, then withdrawal, then warmth again. The timing varied. Sometimes the cycle ran daily, sometimes over weeks, but the structure was always identical. Behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner identified in his foundational research that variable reward schedules, where reinforcement arrives unpredictably, produce more persistent behavior than any other pattern of reinforcement, more persistent than consistent reward, more persistent than consistent punishment. The unpredictability is the mechanism. When you never know when the warmth is coming, your brain becomes consumed with tracking it, anticipating it, working to earn it. You don't become attached to the manipulator exactly. You become attached to the uncertainty of their approval, and they own that uncertainty entirely. Pattern 3. They isolate the target, but they make the isolation feel like the target's own decision. In every case I studied, isolation was present, and in no case did it happen dramatically. There was no moment where anyone said, "Stop seeing your friends." Instead, it accumulated. A comment about how a particular friend doesn't really respect them. a reliable coldness that appeared after the target returned from certain people, a gradual sense that certain topics, certain relationships, were sources of tension rather than support. So the target started making adjustments, canceling plans, not mentioning certain names, spending more and more time within the orbit of the manipulator, not because they were instructed to, but because it had become easier than managing the fallout of not doing so. What isolation accomplishes is this. It removes every person who could have looked at the situation and said, "Wait, does this seem right to you?" With that external check gone, the target's entire understanding of reality runs through a single source, the manipulator. Pattern 4. They created a profound sense of being understood, then used that understanding against the target. This is the pattern that most surprised me in the research, because it doesn't feel like manipulation when it's happening. It feels like the opposite. In every case I examined, the early phase of the relationship was characterized by an extraordinary feeling of being seen. The target described feeling, often for the first time, genuinely known by another person. The manipulator remembered small details, asked unusually perceptive questions, created an atmosphere of, finally, someone who gets me. The manipulator was systematically mapping the target's psychology, learning their deepest insecurities, identifying what they most needed to hear, cataloging where they were most vulnerable. And once they had that map, they used it. The compliments hit exactly where the target needed validation, because the manipulator had learned where that was. Pattern 5. They were never the villain in their own story. This final pattern is what makes the manipulation so difficult to confront, even once you see it. In every case I studied, the manipulator had a complete, self-consistent narrative in which they were never at fault. Not once. Every harmful action had an explanation, a context, a reason that made it not just understandable, but justified. They weren't controlling, they were protective. They weren't cold, they were hurt. They weren't lying, the other person had simply misunderstood. And when directly confronted, they almost invariably performed what researchers call DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. This pattern operates at two levels. It deflects accountability in the moment, but it may also reflect a genuine belief, because many manipulators have constructed such a complete self-justifying narrative that they experience it as truth, which makes it, in some ways, even more difficult to engage with. 50 cases, 5 patterns, the same playbook every time. If this gave you something, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to understand what has been done to them.